Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Christian DeVito, and I'm a senior solution engineer here at Sauce Labs, also with a background in development. So really excited to talk about application and development quality with you all today. I am joined by Nathan McAfee, who is a senior economic analyst at the Enterprise Strategy Group, who really led the charge and initiative for this project to uncover findings that we're going to be sharing today. And also our own Sauce Labs rockstar, Wim Sellis, who is the senior staff product manager of mobile at Sauce Labs. He's based in the Netherlands, and in addition to his day job, he also contributes heavily to open source projects, including WebDriver IO, Appium, and many more. So really excited to hear his input and what he has to share with us today as well. Would you all like to say anything or any words of introduction for yourself?
Oh, no, just appreciate the introduction. It's been a very interesting project to really dig in and understand Sauce Labs and understand some of the challenges that you're able to address.
Great. Well, Nathan, can you provide a little bit of context about what ESG is, what this study is, and tell us some of the process that went into the research?
Absolutely. So Enterprise Strategy Group, we have a group of analysts, and I'm an economic analyst. I specifically focus on putting a number on change. So in this case, we looked at organizations that were developing and testing applications, and looked at the pain that would push them out of their current state towards Sauce Labs, or the pull that would get somebody out of the middle of, hey, we're trying to get along and be just good enough. In addition to me being an economic analyst, Enterprise Strategy Group has technical analysts. So we have market analysts, we have industry analysts. We cover most technologies and most industries. So as part of this project, which you'll hear me call an EVV, an economic value validation, we looked at, I spent a lot of time with all of our different analysts that had something to do with application development and testing. We also looked across multiple different industries. So in addition to the main paper that we generated, we also did 2-page executive summaries looking at how specifically it addresses retail and consumer. We looked at B2B, we looked at regulated industries, and then industrial and manufacturing. As part of the process, in addition to the analysts, we did customer interviews. So I spent, most interviews were about an hour long, so they got very in-depth. And we talked to different Sauce Lab customers again about what was their pain or what was their pull, what got them to adopt Sauce Labs, and then what was specifically the economic impact. We talked a lot about the benefits, which I'll cover, but then we took them a step further and talked about and quantified how does it change the way you can reach either your business or technology goals. Great. With that, we came up with 3 main buckets. So we start by talking about the challenges that they were facing. And we found quite a few across the board, but in the paper, we listed the top 8. And the number 1 challenge was just the demand for our developers' time. The increase in applications is mushrooming. And the numbers that we ended up deciding on the paper, 86% of companies have seen an increase in applications in the last 3 years. 47% have seen that doubled. This also coincides with some custom research that ESG did for Sauce Labs. So in that, they surveyed hundreds of customers, looking again at what was, what's your current situation, what are your challenges, and what are your opportunities.
And Nathan, just
yes.
A question to you. You mentioned like in the last 3 years, for some companies, even double the amount of applications. Did you also, during that research, or you also found kind of like a connection between COVID, like COVID changed the world also in a negative way, but also in certain ways in a little bit of a positive way. Did you also hear that back from customers?
So much of the change started with COVID. So if you look at the changes that COVID injected into most businesses, but specifically businesses that are creating some type of code, some type of application, companies went from having contained locations or central offices to almost immediately having every employee considered their own office. So with that, they had to come up with very quick ways to give to empower every one of those individual employees or individual offices. And so much of that was changes through software. So if we looked at the curve, it's somewhat normalized now, but now it's normalized to the point of being double what it was 3 years ago. But if you look at the spike that happened in 2020 going into 2021, as companies realized, hey, our new normal is now I've got to empower employees everywhere. That spike, it was hard for us to model because as an analyst and I don't think that 400 and 500% spike will continue over the next 3 years. But between what I've learned from my studies and then talking to our analysts, I believe that the 47% projected over another 3 years is pretty accurate, if not too conservative. Then something else that's just to continue on that, because I mean that the whole COVID story propagates. The shift to everyone working at home has changed the mindset of a workforce. In another project that I'm working on, the number is about 40% when you look at the software industry of employee turnover every 12 months. So when you look at being able to plan and project, hey, this is going to be the output of our developers, you now have a lot of your work being done by more junior or people with lesser experience. And part of the story that I heard from the customers about Sauce Labs was, hey, this helps us empower more junior developers to bring them up to our code standards faster. So it's a bit of a rambling. You can see I'm getting excited about it because so many things were coming together as we were really studying the challenges and impact. Does that answer the question, or is something you'd like me to dig more into?
No, that answers the question, and then I think you're now also connecting it to the DIY grids. I was also thinking about the amount of applications that customers are now making are more mobile focused, for example, because going back to that COVID part, everybody now is watching their phones even more. We can go out of our houses. We ordered everything online, so quality needed to be a little bit better also during COVID, even compared to before. So
yeah. Well, let's jump to the end and tell a bit of that story. Anytime where you have rapid change in business, the bad guys, the criminals and bad actors come out. So with all these changes, the increase in not only the number of threats that were coming in, but the sophistication of the criminals coming in was something that I had quite a few good customer interviews about. It's just an overwhelming challenge. And I'll give you one of the quotes now that, hey, we're saving at the end, but it's a great, a great conversation piece, was we no longer could keep up with the complexity of the testing environment to ensure our leadership. Yes, we were secure. So in addition to, hey, I just need to empower employees to produce a higher level of output, I now need to do it in a much more threatening environment than there was in 2019, and that has continued. It continues better. That has escalated even post COVID when we look at the sophistication of the threats coming in to developers. The developers have to be able to consider and test against. So let's jump back in and look at a few more of the challenges as we were going in and setting the table. A big one was the delay in feedback loops, and this specifically came from I talked to some customers that had come from competitive environments. I talked to a lot of customers that had come from DIY environments, and what they said was, by the time we got the feedback to help us understand what we need to change, the dev was already on to something else. and it made them inefficient, and it also hurt their morale quite a bit. Part of the story that came out that I wasn't expecting, but came out again and again and again, is our devs were happier in a Sauce Labs environment because they came here to code. They came here to develop and create. They didn't come here to test things that had been released in the past.
I think
that's it. Sorry, go on, Christine.
That was one of the surprising findings for me reading the study, Nathan, was that almost 2/5 of developer time was being spent on testing. And I just remember when I was a developer, like spending that much time, I found a little bit frustrating for having to go in and try to find the root cause of something, trying to debug when I really just wanted to be releasing new features and developing something exciting for my company.
Yeah, that number is across the board when we looked at it. It depended on every company has their own, threshold of pain. How much are they willing to test before release, and how much pressure do they have to release and test? And that gets into the concept of technical debt. So technical debt is you're paying the price now and in the future for short-sighted decisions that you either made or were forced to make in the past. Now, in a different study that I did, the ESG is just releasing a paper, and the number is about 40% of current IT budgets. Now, I didn't specifically scope that to application developers, but I bet that number at 40% might be even higher of my current budget that is being squandered, being sapped because of decisions in the past. The number that I used in the paper, I believe, was 41% of time spent testing of a dev's time and 59% developing. And I had numbers coming all across the board, but between the custom research or the survey results that we had and the customers I interviewed, I came up with it was almost half and half, 41% testing, 59% developing.
And I think if you look at that, then it's not. I think that 40% is not specifically only testing, but also if you maintain your own grid, for example, for real devices, then it's taking you a very long time to get everything working. And if it's not working, it takes a lot. It's not your core job. It's not your day job. You need to fix environments before you can even test or before you can even develop. So it's pretty nice also to hear those numbers. Also, the previous number that you mentioned about developers being able to get the right value out of Sauce Labs, and this makes me also from a product point of view very happy. We made a decision also within Sauce Labs to also focus on the output of your test cases, the insights, but also if you look, for example, at mobile applications, we all know it's pretty hard to debug mobile applications, and especially when they're in production, you cannot easily roll them back. We focus now also on, for example, error and crash reporting, even during your testing. So not specifically when your app is already in production. Sauce Labs can now already give you the insights that your app is now crashing, and this is the reason why it is crashing. Please fix it, because if you go to production, your customers will not be happy, and we all know what happy customers will do, and we also know what customers will do when they're not happy. So it's really good to hear this feedback also.
The first part you said hit my next point exactly, and that was the cost of maintaining a test farm or test devices. And this is one of the only a customer actually got angry as he was talking to me about this, because the custom research said that the average number of device OS browser combinations they had to test against were 82. But now the workforce is everywhere, and they had a system set up to get those devices in the hands of the devs so they could do their testing. What they didn't have was an effective method to get the devs to send this stuff back to them. So we built a sample financial model with all of my findings, and I ran companies of all different sizes through. And the sample company that we used for the basis of the paper was a $200,000 device farm. But what a customer, one specific one, told me was, hey, we could increase our budget there to get more to send out, but we can't get the devs to send them back to us. And what that really did was create bottlenecks that they couldn't project, they couldn't account for in their scheduling. And injected delays in projects. And then we get into, when I do these interviews, we go down a lot of rabbit holes, but we started talking about, okay, then what's the true cost of a delay in a project? And the most obvious one is the one you just mentioned. We disappoint a customer, whether that be internal or external. A few of the customers that I talked to were specifically in regulated industries. And their fear was, hey, there's a certain thing we must be in compliance. And I can't assure our leaders that, hey, we're going to be in compliance in time. So it created that risk and that, that aggregation in their day-to-day job. But the test devices came out over and over and over as something that has grown exponentially harder since the developers have become remote or hybrid, and how much of a relief it was when they went to Sauce Labs to be able to completely alleviate that pain. So let me ask you, Wim, to inject a little bit. We're going to talk about product later, but let's go ahead and can you inject just about a minute and talk about how Sauce Labs alleviates this pain, because this is something that came out over and over.
I think if you look at that pain, you already mentioned companies needed to ship devices to their developers. That will always deliver that delay. But then we're only talking about developing your application. We're not even talking about constantly running your test cases on those devices, running them unattended on every pull request or even on every commit. So those are kind of like the challenges that also developers will have. And when we're talking about developers, normally what we say within Sauce Labs, you've got like the finders and the fixers. Fixers are the developers that create the applications. The finders are also the people that can create the test scripts to find bugs in your application. But next to the developers, you would also have the downside that the finders are not able to get basically value for money or from the time that they need to spend to find those bugs. And if you would then go back and have this in the cloud, having what is it? I think around 2,000 devices that we have already in the US together with the devices in Europe. I think we're around 4,000 different types of devices. People can run their test cases on the 82 configurations that you mentioned, but they can run them in parallel and they can get the feedback as quick as possible, depending also how long their test scripts are, but they can get the feedback as quick as possible. So,
Okay. We talked a lot about the value of getting that feedback quicker. And to me, going into the project, I thought it'd be, hey, in the end, we release faster. But so much of that went into how frustrating it was for a dev to go into something, context switching, go into something that I have to come back, and by reducing those feedback cycles, that was a huge benefit. Then the last couple to talk about that really came out with the challenges, the number of escape defects, and depending on the industry, the pain of that, in some cases was, hey, that's just a cost of doing business. We prioritize speed or release more than we do reducing post-release fixes. We talked a lot about excessive false negative results, and to me, that seemed like noise going in. But a question back to you, Wim, when you look at the cost of false negative, how does that bog down the process? Can you clarify that a little bit?
I think if I would just look at this when I was creating my test cases as a developer, but also as a QA, when I had multiple false negatives, you're not going to trust your test script anymore. And what happens then is that if your pipeline is red, for example, you would just say, okay, it was red yesterday, so let's just go to production. Let's just deliver our feature to production. And due to the false negatives, you might still have a bug in your application and you're releasing that bug to your customers. And again, then what's the impact of that? Maybe if you have a web application, you could do an easy rollback. But if you have that app installed on a user's device, there's no way of rolling that back if you don't implement something properly for that. And that can cost you also a lot of money. So false negatives is kind of like the hardest part in that complete cycle, that testing cycle. And yeah, you should definitely try to prevent it, because it can burn afterwards if you don't rely on, if you cannot trust basically the results of your pipeline?
What you just said hit the last thing I wanted to talk about, and the challenges. And excuse me, there's a lack of historic quality insights. Pretty much, we're going through the same pain over and over and over. And in some industries where you really need to have a governance plan, a plan of what is expected and how we're going to get there. Customers were really challenged on their own to come up with a way to understand how we, done things in the past and how we fixed it, and been able to improve and grow from it. And I was told over and over again how much Sauce Labs was able to help with that. So
I'd love to add a little.
Yep.
And because I think we're talking about feedback from, just you're running your test cases, you're getting those results. But then when you start to talk about that holistic insights and reporting, then it also ties into reducing things like seeing repetitive false negatives, because with Sauce Labs insights and reporting, you're not just able to see one specific test case failing, or, hey, your build failed today. You're able to see those changes over time, and also which tests are consistently failing or consistently airing out, which then opens up more strategic conversations too around how can we improve the application test that you have written for better practices, for example, because a lot of the errors that we're seeing are coming from the way that the tests themselves are written. So then we're able to work with customers, not just on providing that feedback, but also improving their entire testing strategy through those types of insights. So not just at the development level, but also at the QA manager level or SDET level, those kind of insights and holistic trends over time have been really valuable for customers.
Perfect. It's a great way to say it. Thank you for that clarity. So once we really went in and we identified the pain in the poll, either what would get somebody to look at it and say, hey, I need to find a new solution. We talked about what were you expecting when you went to Sauce Labs. Now that you've now that you've deployed, now that you've adopted, what's the result? We came up with a lot of benefits, but I tried to focus on the ones that were consistent across the different customers, regardless of what industry, regardless of different size. I talked to small ones, I talked to large ones, I talked to people that have migrated from pretty established testing solutions to Sauce Labs, and tried to just focus on the benefits that would project across most organizations. In the three main buckets that we organized them in was acceleration of product releases, improved insight and agility, and then improved risk management. So if we focus first on accelerated product releases, the number that we used in the paper was 50%. We had people that said, hey, we have increased our releases 300%. I didn't have many that said they increased it less than 50%, but I decided on 50% to be conservative. And then also a lot of customers said they completely changed their release strategy or methodology to a constant release, where they were able to do incremental changes with better confidence instead of doing major changes. I wasn't able to get into a solid conversation about, okay, what is the benefit of that, other than they liked it better. But Wim, when you look at companies that do consistent or constant release versus very major milestones, what have you seen to be the benefit of either side?
Yeah, what's the benefit of either side? It also depends, first of all, how far the organization itself is in being able to implement continuous integration and continuous delivery. But I think if you're able to release your product faster, and you also have everything in place to find bugs or in production or even during your testing cycle faster, then it has a huge positive impact in bringing customer value faster to production. If you have a new feature, if you have a bug, being able to release that basically by flipping the switch or doing this with your fingers, that's huge also for your end users. It kind of like gives them the feeling that you're really thinking about how to improve their experience with your product. In comparison to those large releases, I remember when it was in 2014 when I was working for a Dutch bank. We had 4 releases a year, and it took us from Friday evening 8 p.m. to Monday morning 6 a.m. to basically release everything. Yeah, that was pretty hard to also provide the real customer value to our end customers, or basically the people who needed the money were not able in that time span to use their bank account properly as we can do that now. So yeah, it has a huge impact, if I say so.
You just mentioned something that I didn't put in the paper, and I probably should have now that I think about it, but came out quite a few times. And I mentioned, developer satisfaction. But a couple of the people I interviewed said we no longer have to do the weekends away from the family. And that was something that really came out as it's something I couldn't quantify because so I didn't put it in the paper, but that did come out in a few of the conversations.
And to be honest, it was also fun, kind of like having the weekend with also a lot of colleagues. But if you then look at delivering customer value, then I think it was pretty hard then doing that 4 times a year.
Yeah. So we've already sort of talked about the increased device browser testing, how you can test across so many more iterations, but something that came out was the ability to parallel test. I had a few tell me that we had tried to do it on our own, but it is so complex. It takes such an experienced level of developer to try to test in parallel. Can you tell us a little bit about parallel testing and why that is such an impactful benefit of Sauce Labs?
Sure. I think if we first of all look at real devices, then if you need to spin up multiple real devices just on-prem, basically in your own at your own office, for example, then first you need to procure all the devices. That's could be pretty expensive. Then you need to figure out a way to clean all your devices between all the sessions that you want to execute. And then imagine that you need to test your new feature on one of the latest iPhones. Then you might need to have 10 or 20 of those iPhones, but it's not only that iPhone, you also need to have more different types of iPhones, different OS versions. I'm not even talking about Android here. If you would then look at Sauce Labs, you don't need to worry about that. We've got everything in place. It's basically just pushing the button and saying, okay, I want to test this on these and these configurations. And depending on what you have as a customer, but you can go from 1 session to 100 sessions testing your application on all those device configurations. There's always one slight or a small thing that could be, how do you say it, a dependency of this is that your environment also needs to be able, your testing environment also needs to be able to handle the amount of requests. But 9 out of 10 times when people are already running their test cases in the cloud, especially within Sauce Labs, they're already prepared. So it's pretty easy then for them to add the extra capabilities and run everything in the amount of on the amount of configurations that they want.
Okay, makes sense. Shifting into our next bucket, improved insight and agility. I've put a quote in the paper and I wanted to read it here because it was perfect. It says, Sauce Labs helps us find and fix issues we never thought of exploring in the past. Because of the visibility that Sauce Labs gives us, we handle things in the development phase instead of reacting to customer reported issues. And that summarized, again, when I went into this, I thought this was a cost and speed issue. But to talk about the intelligence that Sauce Labs helped, the customers I interview inject into their applications, that was huge. The number we ended between the custom research and the interviews, about a 70% reduction in breaking changes once they adopted Sauce Labs. Then additionally, being able to, this is the quote here, we're able to incorporate more microservices and APIs than we were in the past because we have a clearer strategy for testing and we're more confident in the results. So my question to you, Wim, when we look at this, around the microservices and APIs, so they explained to me, but I'm not a developer, about the ability to test just a certain microservice. And in the past, when they had to test the entire application. And the ability of Sauce Labs to specifically focus a test on a microservice or an API allowed them to use more integrations with confidence. Can you educate a little bit about that? Because again, I'm an economic analyst. I'm not a developer.
Yeah, and I'm also more of a mobile expert than an API testing expert. So I don't know, Christine, if you also have an answer to that one.
The main thing that I would add there is just the level of reporting that we provide, specifically down to the API level through the integration of the network calls in our test results tab. So I know I get feedback from customers a lot that just seeing whether the API calls are passing or failing at that level of each individual request coming and going out of the application under test helps them identify it before it gets to the point of a crash or into production. So that'd be the only thing that I would add there is the insights that we get at the network level through the network car file that customers can download directly from their test results and input that into their API testing strategy, or from seeing the network calls come in directly through the mobile testing in our test results.
Okay, that makes sense. So in my conversations, I always get to, hey, that's great. How does it change the way you can reach your business or technical goals? And with that, they talked about the ability to quickly add functionality that they would have had to ignore in the past because they couldn't get the assurance or the visibility into what was happening. And with that, we went into conversations. Some customers said, hey, we're able to sell our products for more. All customers said we're able to reduce, or we're able to release better quality faster. So if you look at it, there's always a three-corner triangle. You have cost, speed, and quality. And I had customers tell me again and again, we were able to release at a lower cost, faster, and better quality. And it's rare when you're able to get beyond, two corners of that triangle and hit all three.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that for again and again across different customers. It wasn't a one or two time conversation that we had. Was we're able to hit all three sides of the triangle.
I think that there's one remark that I wanted to make also about that, because you mentioned cost. And normally when we talk about cost, also a lot of people then say, yeah, but I also need to pay for the licenses of Sauce Labs. But the thing that a lot of people forget is that when you have your own grid, you also have a lot of hidden costs that you still have. For example, all the people that need to invest and all the challenges that you have with your grid, but you're not allocating in the hours that you think that people are spending in creating test cases. So if you would then look at that, then Sauce Labs is saving a lot of costs on the amount of people that work on maintaining that grid. Now those people can work on the features. Now those people can work on the features that would make your end users happy. And in the end, you could earn as a company money with those new features. So just wanted to add that remark also for the hidden costs.
Good point. And make sure we look at the other side of that equation, which I had conversations of opportunity cost. How are you better able to meet your business goals? If we get outside of the cost of producing the technology, when you enable either your internal customers or you're selling an app to somebody, how are you able to better monetize that? And there's a great story there. It was hard for me to come to a consensus because I've talked to customers across all different industries. But when I go into cost, yes, we always need to check the box of, yes, this is a cost-effective solution. But I also try to get in the conversations of how do you reach your business goals better? and what is the impact of that. So it in addition to cost, there's also a revenue story here. So let's look at the last one, improved risk management. So we've already hit a few of these, more complete testing, better visibility into your testing for companies in compliance-based industries, better reporting of your testing, or almost internal auditing, the ability to produce test plans to satisfy different auditors. But in risk management, the one that came out that I wasn't expecting was staffing risk. The turnover that's happening right now for developers. Once people have leave the central office, a lot of times, it comes down to a salary game. And if somebody's able to offer more, it's much easier to leave. So companies have seen their turnover go up quite a bit, and how much of a risk that injects into their continuity, and how Sauce Labs was able to do two things. One, it was able to make their developers happy because they were able to create code instead of testing. And then the second part of that is how they were able to reduce the learning curve, how quickly they were able to get people up to the company expectations, or the company standards of for coding, as well as how they were able to give more junior people better visibility into what they're doing. So Wim, anything for improved risk management that you think we should add?
No, I think you raised also a good point regarding that staffing risk. I think if you would, hopefully a lot of people that are also watching this or listening this afterwards can imagine that 9 or 10 times you only have 1 or 2 people maintaining that infrastructure for you. And if those people leave, you really have a gap. Not everybody can manage that. And I think that's yeah, I think also one of the business risks, let's say it like that, a very important business risk that people need to acknowledge, that staffing risk, about knowledge leaking out of your company. So
okay,
well, I can jump in a little there.
Perfect.
That brings 2 points to mind. One, when you're talking about the staffing risk, just that frustration of being able to find where those issues are coming from. I know when I'm giving demos, kind of the features that seem straightforward and simple, of just being able to see the video recording of what exactly happened in the test session and all of the interactions that took place. Those types of things, customers are like, oh my gosh, now I don't have to try to explain what happened. I can just share this video. Everything's very easily accessible to share with other members of the team. And then on that topic of risk, I think one thing that isn't talked about enough isn't just internally the risk of staff churn, but your end customers, right? The real risk of them having a negative experience if you're not providing that quality assurance testing all the way into development in the early stages of your process. Then all of those issues are going to leak through to the end customer, and you're going to have the risk of them churning as well. So companies really have to mitigate both of those, making it a better experience both for the developers and for their end user. And I think with solutions like Sauce, it ties it all together really nicely.
Yeah, something you mentioned that I called out in the paper that came out quite a few times was the quality of the Sauce Labs community. That how easy it was to find information to help. Well, it goes back to that quote, to help companies understand and focus on things they never would have thought of before. But that was called out as a pretty impactful benefit. So the paper is analyst. It as I'm going through doing this webinar, I realize how positive I've been about everything. And this is analyst opinion. Sauce Labs was not able to influence what I put in this paper, but every conversation that I had with customers was incredibly positive about the impact. In every conversation, I always ask 2 questions. If every solution in the world costs $0, if everything was the same, would you still use Sauce Labs? Every single person told me yes. The same conversation, if you had the decision to go back and hit a reset button and either delay or change your decision to go to Sauce, would you? Not a single person said they would change it. A few said, we were irritated, we didn't do it sooner, because the speed of the impact, how quickly and easily they were able to get started, surprised them. And that goes to my next question back to you two. So somebody that's, hey, I'm interested, what's their next step? What do they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So if they're interested in already utilizing sauce to some capacity, right, and are looking to expand and try out different parts of their offerings, I would definitely recommend reaching out to your account team if you have an assigned account team. And if not, if you're completely new to Sauce Labs, I'm dropping the link in the chat right now. We do offer a trial for customers to get started on our platform, try out Sauce Labs. We definitely encourage you to sign up there. In addition, you can reach out to myself on LinkedIn, Gabe or Wim, with any questions that you have, and we'd be happy to direct you to the best resource.
Okay. Any questions that you two, or any questions any of the attendees have about the process or the findings that I can answer?
I'll give a second to see if anything
Okay.
pops up in the chat. And while we're waiting for that, Nathan, I'd love to hear, just based on your experience and all of the different studies and research that you've conducted over time, was there anything about this particular study that was surprising to you or really stood out?
The pain associated with managing a device farm. To me, it was a problem that could be solved by just throwing a little more money at it. But hearing the frustration in the voices of the people I interviewed is, I just can't get my devs to send the stuff back. So it's not how much are we willing to spend, it is how many times do I have to tell somebody, you have to delay your tests because I've got to go buy it. I've got to go through procurement and get another test environment. So that really jumped out. I think that's the main one that came out, that, and then the pain associated with staff turnover. I had just finished a project specifically focusing on turnover in the US based markets. And I thought I understand the numbers. I didn't understand the pain. And the pain of, I was looking at it from the point of, what is the cost of having a new person, getting them up to speed? I didn't take into consideration what the drain on the most experienced people would be. In this case, the developers. Is like, in addition to losing somebody, in addition to having somebody ramped, I now have a tax on my most senior developers trying to bring these people up to speed. And how much Sauce Labs was able to come in and to escalate that learning curve, to both get those people up to speed and then remove that tax from my most senior producers. So that'd probably be my two.
Well, fantastic. I'm not seeing any other questions come in through the chat. So
Okay.
I'd like to thank you all for your time today. We really appreciate you joining us. We look forward to hearing from you and helping you get started on Sauce Labs.